The wind came in like a wounded animal, howling across the ridge as darkness fell. Through the whiteout gusts, the luxury lodge blazed with gala lights while inside, a children's choir rehearsed their opening number. On the ridge above, slide beacons strobed through the storm with a strange, offbeat cadence that made Jack Miller pause. He knelt in the lee of his snowcat, pencil scratching against his duct-taped notebook, tracing an old fracture path that pointed like an arrow straight toward the service road below the ballroom. Adelaide Morgan's convoy arrived through the swirling snow, her donors squinting through fogged windows. Venus Hale's voice crackled over the radio. The primary access road was drifting shut. Why would a janitor challenge a contractor before a CEO's gala? When cadence reveals truth, who chooses people over optics? And how can one notebook reroute fate? The storm had been building all day, but Jack Miller had learned long ago that mountains kept their own schedule. In the modest staff cabin tucked behind the maintenance shed, he ladled hot soup into 2 bowls, while his 7-year-old daughter Nora finished her math homework at the kitchen table. The wood stove ticked with heat, and outside, the wind tested every seal and shingle. "Dad, why do you check the weather twice?" Nora asked, pencil poised over a multiplication problem. Jack set her bowl down gently. "Because snow keeps secrets, sweetheart. And secrets can turn dangerous if we're not paying attention." She nodded solemnly, the way children do when they sense the weight behind simple words. Her dark hair caught the lamplight as she bent back to her work. Jack watched her for a moment, seeing her mother's concentration in the set of her jaw. The photo on the mantel showed all 3 of them 2 winters ago before the cancer, before the promises whispered in a hospital room about keeping others safe the way he couldn't keep her. A rattling from next door interrupted his thoughts. Tom, the resort's head cook, was wrestling with a vent cover that the wind had loosened. Jack grabbed his toolbox and stepped into the gale. 5 minutes later, the vent was secure. Tom's grateful pat on his shoulder, warm against the cold. Small fixes, Jack thought. That's what his life had become, small fixes that kept things running while others made the big decisions. Across the resort, in the executive suite, Adelaide Morgan stood before a wall of windows, watching the storm engulf the mountain. Her reflection caught in the glass platinum blonde hair swept into an elegant twist, the red V-neck dress she'd chosen for tonight's gala, hugging her frame with the precision of good tailoring. Behind her, the PR team shuffled through their tablets, voices tight with concern. "The weather's creating a narrative problem," Marcus, her communications director, said carefully. "If we have to close even one access road, the press will what?" Adelaide turned, her green eyes sharp. "Report that we prioritized safety? Good. It's just that the resort's marketing has been very specific about world-class safety systems and all-weather accessibility," Marcus continued. "Any deviation tonight, with the live stream and the donor match for the pediatric burn wing, show me the actual safety metrics." Adelaide cut him off. "Not the marketing copy. The real data." Marcus fumbled with his tablet. The numbers that appeared were impressively green, impressively consistent. Too consistent, Adelaide thought, though she couldn't say why. 20 years of reading investment portfolios had taught her that perfect numbers usually meant someone was hiding imperfect truths. In the maintenance garage, Jack's radio crackled with weather updates as he prepped his snowcat for the night shift. His hands moved automatically through the checklist, while his mind drifted to another storm. 3 years ago, he'd been with the Forest Service then, working avalanche control in the backcountry. A persistent weak layer had been forming all-season depth hoar, the sugar snow that could collapse under load. He'd flagged it, recommended a controlled release before the next storm cycle. The contractor brought in for the operation had different ideas. Cheaper explosives, placed higher on the slope to minimize terrain impact. Jack had protested, shown his data, his meticulous notes on the snowpack structure. But contractors had connections, and Forest Service avalanche techs were just government employees who could be overruled. The slide had run bigger than anyone expected. No one was hurt. Jack had made sure the area was cleared, despite the contractor's pressure to hurry, but the path had taken out a section of access road that stranded a tour group overnight. In the investigation that followed, the contractor's report somehow shifted the blame. Jack's overly conservative approach had created conditions for a larger release. The technical details were twisted just enough to make him the scapegoat. He'd resigned rather than fight a system that had already decided he was expendable. His phone still had Archie Bell's last text, sent a month after Jack left. "You were right about the facets. Data proves it." Jack had never replied. What was the point? Being right didn't rebuild careers or restore reputations. Now, as he climbed into the Snowcat's cab, the familiar diesel rumble settling his nerves, he pushed the memories aside. That was then. This was now a simpler job. A quieter life. A promise to his daughter. To stay safe and steady. The weather station data flowed across his screen as he began his route. Wind speed increasing. Snow density dropping. Temperature gradient steepening. All the ingredients for wind slab formation, especially on the leeward aspects. He pulled out his notebook, the same one he'd carried for 15 years. Held together now with duct tape and determination. His pencil moved across the page, sketching the ridge profile, marking the areas where snow would load heaviest. That's when he noticed the beacon telemetry. The slide sensors along the upper bowls were blinking their status lights. But the pattern was wrong. Jack had spent enough nights watching these systems to know their rhythm by heart. These were stuttering, an offbeat cadence that reminded him of a heart arrhythmia. He keyed his radio. "Base. This is Snowcat 7. I'm seeing irregular patterns on the upper bowl sensors." Venus Hale's voice came back immediately. Professional and alert. "Copy. 7. System shows all green on my board. Damian Cross signed off on the inspection this afternoon." Damian Cross. Jack's grip tightened on the steering wheel. The external safety contractor who'd swooped in 6 months ago, with promises of streamlined operations and cost-effective monitoring. Tall, gaunt, always in that silver-gray suit, even under his parka, with slicked-back blonde hair and eyes like winter ice. Jack had watched him work quick signatures, cursory glances, reports that always seemed to be completed before the actual inspections. "Roger, base. I'm going to take a closer look at the Ridge 7 array. Negative. 7. Mr. Cross was very specific. No unauthorized personnel near the sensor equipment. Jack pulled the Snowcat to a stop, engine idling. Through the windscreen, he could see the lodge glowing below, the ballroom windows casting golden rectangles onto the snow. The service road, carved beneath those windows, a perfect catch basin for any slide from above. He opened his notebook to a sketch from last season, the same slope, the same aspect, a crown line marked where a small slide had released naturally. The fracture had been textbook, following the historical path that avalanche professionals had mapped decades ago. That path ran directly above tonight's gala venue. His pencil traced the line again, then added tonight's data. Wind loading at 30 centimeters per hour. Temperature gradient approaching critical, and those beacons, lying with their stuttered rhythm about conditions everyone needed to know. The radio crackled again. "All units be advised. Primary access road is beginning to drift closed. Chief Wilkins is establishing unified command. All department heads to the operations center." Jack turned the Snowcat toward the lodge. As he drove, snow began to fall harder, each flake adding weight to slopes already stressed by wind. The mountain was gathering itself, building towards something. He could feel it in the way the snow moved, in the way the wind channeled through the terrain. In the operations center, the crowd had gathered resort executives in suits. Chief George Wilkins in his search and rescue jacket, weathered from decades of service. Venus Hale with her tablet and radio, and Damian Cross, immaculate despite the conditions, his smile sharp as glass. Situation straightforward, Damian announced to the room, his confidence filling the space like cologne. We have a weather event, but all systems show green. The senator's already here, the foundation's donors are arriving, and we're going live in 3 hours. He gestured at his laptop screen, where rows of green status indicators glowed. Every beacon, every sensor, every repeater operational and within parameters. Jack entered quietly, snow still melting on his shoulders. Adelaide noticed him immediately, the only person in work clothes, standing slightly apart from the group. There was something about his stillness that drew attention, the way he watched Damian's presentation with an expression she recognized from boardrooms where someone was about to call out cooked books. Question, Jack said, his voice cutting through Damian's flow. What's the sampling rate on those beacons? Damian's smile tightened. Standard interval. Industry spec. Which spec? Because what I'm seeing outside is a 12-second interval with a 3-second float. That's not industry standard, that's a repeater lag. The room shifted. Chief Wilkins leaned forward. Explain. Jack pulled out his notebook, found the right page. I've been tracking the blink patterns for the last hour. Every 10th pulse is delayed. That only happens when a repeater is struggling to relay data, usually because it's overloaded or damaged. He showed the page to Wilkins, columns of times, precise to the second. If the repeaters are lagging, the green status we're seeing could be cached data from hours ago. This is ridiculous, Damian snapped. We're going to delay $1 million fundraiser because a janitor doesn't understand beacon technology? The word janitor hung in the air like a slap. Venus stepped forward. Jack's our senior night operator. He knows these mountains better than a certified safety contractor? Damian pulled out a binder, thick with official-looking documents. Every system was inspected and certified today. My signature, county approved. He fixed Jack with those cold gray eyes. Unless you're suggesting I'm incompetent. I'm suggesting, Jack said evenly, that we verify the raw data from the telemetry shed. Takes 5 minutes. Adelaide watched the exchange, reading the dynamics like she would a hostile board meeting. Damian was too defensive. His certainty too performed. Jack was too calm, the kind of calm that came from being absolutely certain of your position. Chief Wilkins, she said, her voice cutting through the tension. What's the protocol here? Wilkins straightened, 25 years of emergency management in his bearing. Protocol is we err on the side of caution when there's any question about safety systems. Mr. Miller, you'll accompany Venus to check the telemetry shed. I'll supervise by radio. Mr. Cross, you'll provide the access codes. Damian's face darkened. The liability, Adelaide interrupted, of ignoring a safety concern would be catastrophic. Venus, Jack, go. We'll hold the shuttles until you report back. The telemetry shed sat 50 yards from the main building. A concrete block structure that hummed with electronics. Venus keyed in the code while Jack pulled on work gloves, his breath visible in the cold. Inside, the smell hit them immediately: cold metal, ozone, and something else. Burnt insulation. Christ, Venus muttered, her flashlight beam catching scorch marks on one of the repeater boards. Jack moved systematically through the equipment, his hands sure despite the cold. Battery sleds pulled out, connections checked. On the third unit, he found it battery pairs swapped. Positive to negative terminals reversed on the backup system. It would show green on a basic diagnostic, but fail under load. "Chief, we have deliberately misconfigured equipment," Jack reported over the radio. "Batteries swapped, at least one repeater board damaged," and he paused, kneeling beside a sensor unit. "Someone's taped this sensor to force a constant green signal." Through the radio, they could hear the ops room erupting. Damien's voice rose above the chaos, insisting on equipment malfunction, demanding they continue with the gala schedule. Adelaide's voice cut through like a blade, calm, decisive, authoritative. "Mr. Miller, can you restore proper function?" Jack was already working, Venus holding the light as he reseated connections, swapped the batteries to their correct positions, and carefully peeled the tape from the sensor. The unit immediately went amber, then red, then settled to an honest yellow cautionary, but not critical. "Partial restoration," he reported. "But I need to check the upper ridge repeater. The cadence is still off." "How long?" 20 minutes if I take the snowcat." "Do it." As Jack headed for the door, Venus caught his arm. "Your notebook. Those sketches and timestamps. You've been documenting this all season?" He nodded. "Old habit. Good habit." "Damien's been filing reports for equipment he never actually inspected, hasn't he?" "That's for the investigation to determine," Jack said carefully. "Right now, we need to make sure that ballroom stays safe." Outside, the storm had transformed the resort into a white void. Jack drove by instinct and GPS, the snowcat's tracks filling behind him almost instantly. The upper ridge repeater was housed in a small utility box on a buried mast, barely visible above the snowpack. He had to dig to reach the access panel, snow filling the hole almost as fast as he could clear it. Inside, more evidence of neglect moisture in the housing. Connections corroded. A processor board with a manufacture date from 5 years ago, despite records showing replacement last month. Jack vented the housing, cleared the connections with contact cleaner from his kit, and reseated every cable. The rhythm immediately smoothed out. "Base, Ridge 7 repeater restored. You should be seeing accurate data now." Venus's response was tight. "Jack, you need to see this. Real readings are showing significant loading on the Silver Creek aspect. That's directly above the ballroom service road," Jack finished. "I'm coming back." In the operations center, the mood had shifted from confusion to contained crisis. The true sensor readings showed yellow and amber across the upper slopes, with 2 arrays deep in the red. Adelaide stood at the center, her red dress a splash of color among the earth tones of emergency gear, reading the situation with the same intensity she brought to quarterly reports. "Options?" she asked the room. Chief Wilkins laid out the situation with military precision. "We can't evac down the main road, it's drifting closed faster than we can plow. The service road is compromised by slide risk. We have 240 guests, 40 staff, and a children's choir." "I have a proposal," Jack said, entering with his notebook. He spread it open on the table, revealing page after page of hand-drawn maps, each dated, each showing different snow conditions and routes. "There's a protected route through the trees. Comes out by the lower maintenance shed. It's longer but sheltered from the slide paths. We can stage snowcats as emergency shuttles, move the mobility-impaired guests and the children first." "That'll take hours," someone protested. "Better than the alternative," Wilkins said grimly. "Mr. Miller, show me this route." As Jack traced the path with his pencil, Adelaide moved closer, studying not just the maps but the man who'd drawn them. Each page showed the same meticulous attention weather conditions noted in the margins, snow crystal observations, temperature gradients, wind patterns. This wasn't just documentation, it was devotion. "You do this every night?" she asked. "Every shift for 15 years. Jack replied without looking up. "Mountains don't lie, if you know how to listen to them." "Unlike some people," Venus added, glaring at Damien, who stood apart, typing furiously on his phone. The evacuation began with the efficiency of well-trained professionals. Jack led the first convoy through the trees, his snowcat's lights cutting through the storm. Behind him, 3 more cats carried the children's choir, their young voices occasionally rising in partial song, keeping spirits up. Adelaide had insisted on riding in the last vehicle, refusing special treatment. Halfway through the route, Jack's radio crackled. It was Nora's babysitter, voice worried. "Jack, Nora won't go to bed. She says she needs to help. Put her on." His daughter's voice came through, small but determined. "Dad, I'm watching the board in the ops center on the TV feed. Every 10th blink is still late on the south face array." Jack's hands tightened on the wheel. "Out of the mouths of babes." "Which array, sweetheart?" "S? F? 7. It's been doing it for the last hour." Another repeater, another failure point. But SF7 was above the alternative route too, just further east. "Thank you, Snow Angel. Now, go to bed. I'll be home soon. Promise, promise." He changed course slightly, adding another few hundred yards, but moving them completely out of any potential slide path. Behind him, the convoy adjusted smoothly. Through his mirrors, he caught a glimpse of Adelaide in the last cat, her face illuminated by the dashboard lights, watching the mountain with the same intensity she'd watched him in the ops center. They reached the lower shed without incident, guests transferring to the waiting buses that would take them to hotels in town. The children's choir director, an elderly woman with silver hair, gripped Jack's hand as she exited. "You saved us," she said simply. "Just doing my job, ma'am." But it wasn't just his job, and everyone knew it. Word was already spreading among the guests. The janitor who'd stood up to the contractor, the notebook full of hand-drawn maps that had shown them the safe path. Someone had filmed Jack, explaining the routes and posted it to social media. Within minutes, it had hundreds of shares. Back in the ops center, Damien was in full damage control mode. "This is hysteria," he insisted to a group of resort executives. "We're destroying the resort's reputation based on the paranoid fantasies of a disgraced Forest Service dropout." Adelaide, who had just entered, stopped dead. "What did you say?" Damien turned, his smile sharp. "Oh, you didn't know? Your hero was forced out of federal service 3 years ago. Caused an avalanche that stranded tourists. It's all public record." Actually, a gravelly voice said from the doorway, "It's not." Everyone turned to see a stocky man in a county avalanche center jacket, shaking snow from his shoulders. Archie Bell, Jack's old colleague, looking like he'd driven through hell to get there. "The investigation records were sealed," Archie continued, pulling out a tablet. "But the metadata isn't. And that metadata shows something interesting. All of Damien's safety reports for this resort were uploaded by automated scripts, timestamps preceding the actual inspection windows." He looked directly at Damien. "You've been filing pre-written reports for months, haven't you? Just changing the dates." Venus had her own tablet out. "That explains the battery purchase orders. We've been billed for new batteries every month, but the serial numbers in the shed are all from the original installation 2 years ago." The room erupted. Resort executives shouting about liability. Wilkins calling for the county attorney. PR staff frantically texting. Through it all, Adelaide stood silent, processing. Then she walked to where Jack stood by the window, still in his wet work clothes, still holding his notebook. "The Forest Service incident," she said quietly. "Tell me." Jack met her eyes. "I flagged a dangerous condition. The contractor cut corners. When it went bad, I was the convenient scapegoat. I didn't fight it because—" He paused, thinking of Nora, of his wife in the hospital, of choosing battles worth fighting. "Because I had bigger things to protect." She studied his face, CEO instincts measuring truth against fabrication. And tonight? Tonight's different. Tonight there are kids in that choir, guests trusting the resort's safety, and you. He caught himself. Me? You asked for the truth instead of the narrative. That's rare. Before Adelaide could respond, a deep rumble shook the building. Everyone rushed to the windows. On the slope above, illuminated by the emergency lights, a slide had released. Not huge, not catastrophic, but following exactly the path Jack had marked in his notebook straight across the primary service road, burying it under 10 feet of debris. The silence that followed was deafening. If we hadn't evacuated, someone whispered. Adelaide turned to face the room, and Jack saw the CEO emerge fully, the person who'd built a foundation from nothing, who'd made hard calls in harder rooms than this. "We're going live in 10 minutes, she announced. Not with the gala, but with something more important. Venus, set up a camera in here. Jack, I want you beside me with that notebook. Chief Wilkins, please have the county attorney standing by." "Adelaide," Marcus protested. "The narrative implications, the narrative," Adelaide said firmly, "is that we chose lives over liability. Truth over reputation. That's a story I'm proud to tell." Damien tried to slip out, but Wilkins had already positioned a deputy by the door. The contractor's perfect composure finally cracked, his face flushing red above his silver-gray suit. "You don't understand the pressure," he snarled at Jack. "The resort demands perfect safety scores for insurance, for marketing. You think your little sketches matter? The board only cares about green lights and good numbers." "No," Adelaide corrected coldly. "That's what you assumed we cared about. But fraudulent green lights are worse than honest red ones." She turned to the camera Venus had set up. "Are we live?" In 3, 2, Adelaide faced the lens, poised despite the chaos around her. "Good evening. I'm Adelaide Morgan, CEO of the Morgan Venture Foundation. Tonight's gala has been postponed due to severe weather, but I want to address what's really happened here." She spoke for 5 minutes, laying out the facts without drama or spin. Failed safety systems, fraudulent reporting, and the quiet heroism of a night shift worker who'd insisted on truth. Beside her, Jack stood uncomfortably, his notebook clutched in his hands. "Mr. Miller," Adelaide said, turning to him, "would you show our viewers what you showed us?" Jack opened the notebook, his hands steady now, and held up the page, with tonight's route marked. The camera zoomed in on his careful sketches, the margin notes, the accumulated wisdom of years spent reading the mountain's moods. "This is just observation," he said simply. "Snow doesn't lie. It tells you what it's going to do if you pay attention. Tonight, it was saying danger, and these sensors were saying safe. When those two things don't match, you trust the snow, even when it costs money? Reputation," Adelaide prompted. Jack glanced at her, something passing between them that the camera caught but couldn't quite define. Especially then, because reputation built on lies comes down like a cornice in spring, sudden and destructive. The live stream chat exploded. Thousands of comments pouring in. Donors pledging support, not despite the canceled gala, but because of it. The children's choir director called in, her voice clear over speakerphone, thanking the resort for putting their safety first. The county attorney confirmed that charges would be filed against Damien Cross for fraud and endangerment. But the moment that went truly viral came when Nora appeared in the doorway, having snuck out of the staff quarters. The 7-year-old walked straight to Adelaide, looked up at her with those serious dark eyes, and asked, "Did my dad's map keep everyone safe?" Adelaide knelt down, her red dress pooling on the floor, and took the child's hands. "Yes, sweetheart. Your dad's map saved everyone." Nora nodded. then pulled something from her pocket, a pencil, worn down to half its length. This was Mom's. She said, "Pencils tell the truth, because you can see where they've been erased and rewritten. Dad uses it for his important maps." She held it out to Adelaide. "For your maps." The CEO of a multi-million-dollar foundation, who'd negotiated with senators and billionaires, found herself without words. She took the pencil gently, looking up at Jack, who stood frozen, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "Thank you," Adelaide whispered to Nora. Then, louder, to Jack. "Both of you." The storm passed near dawn, leaving the resort transformed under 3 feet of new snow. The morning light revealed the slide paths, exactly where Jack's notebook had predicted. Tons of snow and debris that would have been catastrophe if not for one man's insistence on truth. In the weeks that followed, the investigation uncovered the full extent of Damien's fraud. Falsified inspections, diverted funds, intimidated employees. 3 other resorts came forward with similar stories. The contractor faced federal charges, his silver-gray suit traded for orange coveralls. Adelaide restructured the resort's entire safety program, implementing what became known as the Miller Protocol: independent verification, real-time data transparency, and respect for field expertise, regardless of job title. She created a new position, Director of Mountain Safety and Resilience, reporting directly to the board. She offered it to Jack in a quiet meeting in her office. No cameras, no audience, just the 2 of them and the truth. "I can't be bought," Jack warned. "If something's dangerous, I'll say so, regardless of the cost." "That's exactly why I need you," Adelaide replied. She held up the pencil Nora had given her, now framed on her desk. "Your daughter asked if I had my own map yet." "I do. It leads to doing things right, even when it's hard." Jack took the job, with conditions. No suit required. Notebook always welcome. And the freedom to train others in reading the mountain's truth. The foundation endowed avalanche safety scholarships in the name of Jack's late wife, ensuring future generations would learn to see what he saw. The children's choir eventually performed their concert in a smaller, safer venue, their voices rising pure and strong. Adelaide attended, sitting beside Jack and Nora in the 3rd row. No VIP section, no special treatment. When the conductor recognized Jack, the entire audience stood and applauded. He remained seated, uncomfortable with praise, but Nora stood on her chair and clapped loudest of all. Later, as they walked out into the clear mountain night, Adelaide asked him, "What does the mountain say now?" Jack looked up at the peaks, studying the wind patterns, the way the snow settled, the promise of spring hidden in winter's grip. "It says we're learning to listen." Venus found them there, standing in the snow, and snapped a photo that would later hang in the resort's lobby, the CEO in her red dress, the safety director in his work clothes, and between them, a little girl, holding both their hands, all looking up at the mountain that had taught them about truth. 6 months later, when a late-season storm threatened another event, the early warning systems Jack had installed detected instability 2 days in advance. The evacuation was smooth, organized, without panic. The local news called it textbook crisis management. But Jack knew better. It was just reading the snow and telling the truth about what it said. Archie Bell, now a regular consultant for the resort, liked to tell the story in bars and conferences. Jack Miller? He's the guy who proved that a notebook and a pencil could be worth more than $1 million in high-tech sensors. But more than that, he proved that speaking truth to power isn't just about courage, it's about competence. When you know your stuff, really know it, the truth becomes impossible to ignore. The notebook itself became something of a legend. Jack continued filling its pages, each storm, each season, each small observation building on the last. Other resorts requested copies, and Jack obliged, but always with a note. These are just observations. Your mountain will tell its own story if you learn how to listen. Damian Cross's trial made headlines, his attempts to shift blame crumbling under the weight of evidence timestamps, metadata, and Jack's meticulous documentation. The photo of him being led away in handcuffs, his perfect hair finally mussed, ran in papers nationwide under headlines about corporate fraud and the importance of whistleblowers. But for Jack, the real victory was smaller and quieter. It came on a Tuesday morning when Nora brought a friend home from school, and the friend's mother recognized him from the news. "You're the hero who saved the gala," she gushed. "No," Jack corrected gently. "I'm just someone who pays attention." The woman looked confused. But Adelaide, who'd stopped by to review new safety protocols, understood perfectly. "That's exactly what makes you a hero," she said. "Most people see what they want to see. You see what's actually there." Their relationship evolved slowly, built on shared values rather than attraction alone. Though that was there too. Adelaide learned to read Jack's silences, the way he'd stand a little straighter when conditions worried him, the slight squint that meant he was calculating snow load. Jack learned to see past Adelaide's CEO armor to the woman who'd built a foundation on the principle that wealth meant responsibility, who'd chosen truth even when it cost her. The first time she kissed him was after a controlled avalanche release, planned and executed flawlessly using his protocols. As the snow settled safely in the designated runout zone, she turned to him, hard hat askew, and said, "You know what I love about you? You make dangerous things safe without making safe things boring." "Is that a compliment?" Jack asked, amused. "The highest," she said, and kissed him while the crew pretended not to watch, and Nora definitely did watch, grinning from her spot in the observation post. The resort thrived under the new safety protocols. Bookings actually increased, families drawn to a place that had publicly chosen their well-being over profit margins. The story of the notebook and the storm became part of the resort's lore, told to new employees as part of their training. Every year on the anniversary of the storm, Adelaide hosted a dinner for the staff who'd worked that night. Not a gala, not a fundraiser, just a gathering of people who'd faced danger together and chosen correctly. Jack would bring his notebook, now in its third volume of duct tape repairs, and read selected entries from that night. The timestamps, the observations, the gradual realization that something was deeply wrong. "What strikes me," Chief Wilkins said at one such dinner, "is that you never stop documenting. Even when no one was listening." "Someone's always listening," Jack replied, glancing at Nora, now 10, and already showing her father's attention to detail, her mother's pencil always in her pocket, even if it's just the mountain. The pediatric burn unit that Adelaide's foundation had been fundraising for was completed 18 months after the storm. At the dedication, she insisted Jack cut the ribbon with her. He protested that he had nothing to do with the medical facility. But Adelaide disagreed. "You showed us that protecting people isn't about looking good," she said. "It's about doing good, even when no one's watching. Especially then. This unit exists because donors saw that truth in action and wanted to be part of it." The ribbon-cutting photo made the local paper's Adelaide in elegant business attire, Jack in his usual work clothes, and between them, a survivor from the children's choir holding the scissors. The headline read, "Built on Truth, New Burn Unit Honors Heroes of the Storm." But Jack's favorite photo from that day was different. Nora had taken it with his phone, Adelaide teaching her how to read a topographical map, both of them bent over his notebook, pencils in hand, mapping something new together. In the background, barely visible, the mountain rose white and honest against a clear blue sky. Years passed. Jack's protocols became industry standard. Adelaide's foundation grew, always guided by the principle that transparency built better outcomes than perfection. Nora grew up surrounded by truth-tellers and mountain readers, learning that courage meant speaking up when something was wrong, even if your voice shook. The notebook evolved into a teaching tool. Jack would bring new safety officers to the slopes, hand them a pencil and a blank page, and say, "Draw what you see, not what you think should be there. Not what you hope is there, but what's actually there." Some struggled at first, trained by years of forms and checkboxes to see only what fit predetermined categories. But gradually, they learned. They learned to see the way wind sculpted snow into warnings, the way temperature changes wrote themselves in crystal formation, the way the mountain told its stories to those who paid attention. One young trainee asked, "How do you know when you've seen enough to make a call?" Jack thought of that night, of the stuttering beacons and Adelaide's first hard question about safety metrics. When what you're seeing makes you uncomfortable enough to speak up, even when everyone else says it's fine. Especially then. The trainee nodded, making a note in her own notebook, a fresh one. No duct tape yet, but Jack could see she held her pencil correctly, ready to record truth rather than convenience. Adelaide often joined these training sessions, adding her perspective on leadership and decision-making. "Jack taught me something crucial," she'd tell the groups. "The person closest to the problem usually sees the solution first. Our job as leaders isn't to have all the answers, it's to listen to the people who do." Their wedding was small, held at the resort on a clear winter day between storms. Nora was the maid of honor, carrying the rings in a small box made from reclaimed wood from the old telemetry shed. Chief Wilkins officiated, his words simple and direct. "These two have already proven they can weather storms together. Now, they're just making it official." The reception was in the same ballroom that had been threatened that night 3 years ago. Through the windows, the mountain stood white and peaceful, its slopes groomed and safe. Jack had checked the weather 3 times that morning. Old habits dying hard. Adelaide had checked it twice herself. New habits born of love and understanding. "No storms today," she'd said, finding him on the deck with his morning coffee and notebook. "No," he'd agreed, then pointed to a thin line of clouds on the horizon. "But there's weather building for Thursday. We should adjust the grooming schedule." She'd kissed him then, tasting coffee and certainty. "I love that you never stop watching. I love that you never stop asking the right questions," he'd replied. The story could end there, with a wedding and safety and storms weathered together. But mountains don't stop teaching just because humans find happiness, and Jack's notebook never stopped filling with observations. It was another January, another storm, when the real test came. Not of safety systems or protocols, but of the culture they'd built together. A new board member, brought in for his financial expertise, questioned the excessive safety budget. "We haven't had a serious incident in 4 years, he argued in the board meeting. "Perhaps we're over-investing in precaution." Adelaide started to respond, but Jack raised his hand slightly, their signal that he had something to say. She yielded the floor, watching with pride as her husband stood, notebook in hand. "Would you like to know why we haven't had an incident?" he asked mildly. The board member nodded, expecting statistics, spreadsheets, presentations. Instead, Jack opened his notebook to that day's entry. 6:15 this morning, observed settling in the North Pole, initiated preventive release. 7:30, wind loading on eastern aspect approaching critical, closed upper traverse. 9:40, temperature spike noted. Adjusted grooming pattern to avoid solar aspects during peak heating. He looked up. "We haven't had incidents because we act on observations before they become incidents. Your insurance premiums reflect that. Your reputation reflects that. Your guests' trust reflects that. But the cost of prevention is always less than the cost of catastrophe," Adelaide interjected smoothly. "Jack, show him the storm night footage." They played the video from 3 years ago, the slide releasing exactly where Jack had predicted, the tons of snow and debris that would have buried the service road if they hadn't evacuated. The board member went pale. "That could have been 240 people," Jack confirmed, including 60 children. What would that have cost? The safety budget was approved unanimously. Later, walking through the resort as evening fell, Adelaide took Jack's arm. You know what I realized today? What's that? We're not just running a resort or a foundation. We're teaching people that truth has value, that expertise matters regardless of title, that preventing disaster is more heroic than responding to it. Jack squeezed her hand. Your daughter gets it, he said. And Adelaide smiled at how he still sometimes forgot that Nora was their daughter now. Adopted heart, if not law. As if summoned, Nora appeared around the corner, 17 now, and headed to college next year to study atmospheric sciences. She carried her own notebook, as meticulously kept as her father's, and her mother's pencil, worn down and precious. Dad, the West Bowl sensors are showing that pattern again, she said without preamble. The stuttering one, but different. I think it's temperature differential, not repeater lag. Jack studied her notes, pride warm in his chest. She'd not only learned to see, but to distinguish, to parse the mountain's complex language into individual words and meanings. Good catch. What's your recommendation? Manual verification before tomorrow's opening. I can take the snowcat up at first light if you want. He glanced at Adelaide, who nodded. Their daughter, raised on truth and trained in observation, ready to carry the tradition forward. Take Marcus with you, Jack said, referring to the newest safety officer. Show him how to read the differential patterns. Nora grinned and headed off to prep equipment. Adelaide watched her go, then turned to Jack. She's going to change things, isn't she? She already is, Jack replied, thinking of how Nora had designed a new data visualization system that made pattern recognition easier for trainees, how she'd started a youth avalanche awareness program, how she approached every problem with the question, what is the mountain really saying? The sun set behind the peaks, painting the snow rose and gold. In the lodge, guests settled in for dinner, unaware of the constant vigilance that kept them safe. In the ops center, Venus ran through the evening checklist with her team, Jack's protocols now second nature. In town, Archie Bell taught an avalanche course, using examples from that night 3 years ago to illustrate the importance of speaking up when something feels wrong. And in the shed where it all began, the new telemetry equipment hummed quietly, monitored by people trained to see patterns and trust their observations. On the wall, someone had framed a photo from the local paper Jack with his notebook, Adelaide in her red dress, and the headline, Truth in the Snow. How one voice changed everything, but Jack knew better. One voice hadn't changed everything. One voice had started something, a cascade of truth-telling that grew like an avalanche crown line, spreading from person to person until it couldn't be stopped. Venus speaking up about the falsified reports, Archie driving through a blizzard with evidence, Adelaide choosing transparency over narrative, Nora asking the simple questions that reset adult priorities. Each voice had mattered. Each observation had built on the last. Like snow accumulating on a slope, truth gathered its own weight until it became undeniable. Standing there in the fading light, notebook in hand, Jack made another entry. Not about snow or weather or safety systems, but about something harder to measure and more important to document. January 15th, he wrote. Clear evening after morning snow. All systems operational. Team functioning with high trust and communication. Mountain at rest. Community strong. Truth valued. He paused, then added, read the snow, read the soul. Both are always speaking. We just have to remember to listen. Adelaide found him there as full dark fell, still writing in his notebook by the light of his headlamp. She didn't interrupt, just stood beside him, reading over his shoulder. When he finished, she took the pencil from his hand and added her own note in the margin. And when we listen, We must have the courage to act on what we hear." Jack smiled, pulling her close. Around them, the resort hummed with quiet life guests, laughing in the restaurant, staff preparing for the next day, the mountain itself settling under its blanket of snow. Safe. For now, because people were watching, listening, documenting. "You know what Nora asked me yesterday?" Adelaide said against his shoulder. "What?" "Whether speaking truth gets easier with practice." Jack considered this. 3 years ago, he'd almost walked away rather than fight. Now, truth-telling was woven into every aspect of their lives, their work, their family, their community. "What did you tell her?" "I told her it doesn't get easier. It gets more necessary. And once you understand that necessity, staying quiet becomes the hard thing." They stood together in the darkness, two people who'd found each other in a crisis and built something lasting from its lessons. Above them, stars emerged between clearing clouds, and the mountain slept peacefully under snow that would tell its own stories come morning. Jack would be there to read them, notebook ready, pencil sharp. Adelaide would be there to ensure those readings were heard and heeded. Nora would be there to carry the tradition forward into a future where truth mattered more than comfort, where expertise was valued regardless of title, where one voice speaking up could still save lives. The resort had become more than a business or a destination. It had become a teaching ground, a place where people learned that mountains don't lie and neither should we, where a duct-tape notebook could be worth more than million-dollar systems if the person holding it knew how to read what was really there, where janitors could be heroes and CEOs could admit uncertainty, and 7-year-olds could ask the questions that mattered most. Every guest who stayed there, every employee who trained there, every child who learned to ski there, absorbed this lesson in some small way. The story of the storm and the notebook spread far beyond the resort, inspiring other places to examine their own systems, their own willingness to hear uncomfortable truths. Damian Cross served 2 years in federal prison, his reputation destroyed, his contracts void. But even he, in the end, provided a teaching moment. During his sentencing, he'd admitted that he'd believed everyone operated like he did, cutting corners, prioritizing appearance over reality, assuming that safety was just another performance metric to be gamed. "I genuinely didn't understand," he'd said, orange jumpsuit replacing his silver suit, "that some people actually care more about doing right than looking good." The judge, reviewing Jack's documentation and Adelaide's testimony, had responded, "That's exactly why accountability matters. Because when we don't hold people responsible for lies, we teach everyone that truth is optional." It wasn't optional at the resort anymore. Every morning, the safety team gathered for what they called notebook review. Not a formal meeting, but a sharing of observations, patterns noticed, concerns raised. Everyone from the newest liftie to the most senior manager had a voice in these gatherings, and everyone's observations were recorded and considered. The practice spread to other departments. The kitchen staff started documenting food safety observations. The maintenance team mapped equipment wear patterns. The guest services team tracked satisfaction not through surveys, but through careful observation of how people actually used the facilities. "You've created a culture of professional witnessing," a business school professor told Adelaide during a case study visit. "Every employee feels responsible for seeing and reporting truth." "Jack created it," Adelaide corrected. "I just made sure it was heard." But Jack, characteristically, deflected credit. "The mountain created it," he'd say. "We just learned to pay attention." The foundation's work expanded, funding avalanche education programs nationwide. The scholarship recipients, young people who might never have afforded professional training, carried Jack's philosophy into new places. They learned not just how to read snow, but how to speak up when readings troubled them, how to document carefully, how to value thorough observation over quick assumption. One scholarship recipient, a young woman from a small mountain town, wrote to Jack after her first season as a professional patroller. "You taught me that expertise isn't about being the loudest voice in the room. It's about being the most observant presence on the mountain. Thank you for showing me that quiet knowledge spoken with conviction can move more than mountains, it can move minds. Jack kept the letter in his notebook, pressed between pages of weather observations and snow profiles. It reminded him that the work continued beyond what he could see, rippling outward like the compression waves through snowpack that preceded avalanches. On the 5th anniversary of the storm, the resort held a symposium on ethical leadership in high-risk industries. People came from around the world. Ski areas, yes, but also nuclear plants, hospitals, aviation companies. All industries where ignored warnings could cost lives. Jack gave the keynote, uncomfortable in the spotlight, but determined to share what he'd learned. He brought his original notebook, the one from that night, now carefully preserved but still wrapped in duct tape. "This isn't about hero worship," he began, holding up the battered notebook. "It's about the heroism of daily observation, consistent documentation, and the courage to say something's wrong when everyone else says it's fine." He told the story not dramatically, but factually. The beacon cadence, the telemetry shed, the swapped batteries, the taped sensor. But more importantly, he told about the culture that had allowed it to happen, the assumption that perfect numbers mattered more than honest assessment, that contractor certificates trumped field observation, that job titles determined whose voice counted. "Every disaster has witnesses," he concluded. People who saw something wrong, but didn't feel empowered to speak up. Or worse, who spoke up and weren't heard. Our job as leaders, as humans, is to make sure those voices aren't just heard but heeded. The symposium led to the creation of the Miller Protocol, not just for avalanche safety, but for any industry where observation could prevent catastrophe. It was simple. Document what you see. Report without fear. Investigate without prejudice. Act on evidence, not assumption. Companies that adopted it reported fewer accidents, but also unexpected benefits, increased innovation, improved morale, better customer trust. When people knew their observations mattered, they observed more carefully. When they knew truth was valued over appearance, they stopped wasting energy on performance and focused on performance. Adelaide watched it all with a mixture of pride and amusement. "You've become exactly what you never wanted to be," she told Jack one evening. "A famous expert." "I'm not famous," Jack protested, even as another request for consultation sat in his inbox. "You're notebook famous," Nora interjected. "Home from college for winter break. That's better than regular famous. It means you're known for something real." She was right, of course. The notebook had become a symbol, not of perfection, but of persistence, not of heroism, but of everyday vigilance. Other safety professionals started carrying them, understanding that technology could fail but observation endured. The resort thrived under this philosophy. It became known not as the place where nothing went wrong, but as the place where problems were caught early, addressed honestly, and learned from openly. Guests felt safer knowing that every employee was empowered to speak up, that every concern was investigated, that truth trumped marketing. "Your transparency is your brand now," the marketing director told Adelaide, somewhat bemused. "People literally book here because they trust us to tell them if something's unsafe." It was true. The resort's website featured a live feed of actual safety conditions, not sanitized, not simplified, just honest. Red lights showed when areas were closed, yellow when conditions required caution, green only when genuinely safe. And people appreciated it, choosing informed consent over false reassurance. 10 years after the storm, Jack stood on the same ridge where he'd first noticed the stuttering beacons. The equipment was all new now, triple redundant, constantly monitored, but he still carried his notebook, still sketched the snow patterns, still listened to what the mountain was saying, beyond what the sensors reported. Beside him stood Marcus, now the senior safety officer, and 3 new trainees. They all had notebooks, all had pencils, All understood that technology enhanced observation but couldn't replace it. "What do you see?" Jack asked them, the same question he asked every trainee on their first day. They looked. Really looked. One noticed the wind pattern. Another saw the temperature gradient. The third spotted the crown line from an old slide, almost invisible under new snow. "Good," Jack said. "Now, what do you hear?" They listened. Wind through trees, snow settling, the distant hum of the lodge. But also something else. The particular silence that came before weather changed. The held breath quiet that preceded storms. "Low pressure moving in," one ventured. Jack nodded. "When?" They conferred, checking their notes from the morning weather briefing, comparing observations. "Tonight. Maybe midnight. Maybe isn't good enough when lives depend on it." "What would make you certain?" they thought. Then one pulled out her phone. "I could check the satellite data, the pressure readings, the forecast models." "You could," Jack agreed. "But what if the power's out? What if the satellites are down? What if you only have what you can see and feel and know?" They looked again, more carefully this time. The way the snow was starting to form tiny rollers on the steep faces, the particular color of the clouds, the way birds were moving to shelter. 6 hours, another said with more confidence. "The storm hits in 6 hours." Jack checked his watch, then his notebook where he'd written his own prediction. 5.5, by my estimate. But you're learning to see. That's what matters. As they headed back down, one trainee asked, "Do you ever worry about being wrong?" Jack thought of that night, of the moment he'd stood in the ops center and contradicted the official reports, of the weight of lives in his weathered hands. "Every day," he admitted, "but I worry more about staying quiet when I see danger." Because here's the truth. We're all wrong sometimes, but we're catastrophically wrong when we ignore what we see because it's inconvenient or uncomfortable or challenges authority. "Is that why you and Miss Morgan work so well together?" Another trainee asked with the boldness of youth. "Because she listens even when it's uncomfortable?" Jack smiled, thinking of Adelaide in the board meeting that morning. Shutting down another attempt to cut the safety budget. Wielding spreadsheets and passion with equal skill. "We work well together because we both believe that truth has value," he said simply. "And we're both willing to fight for it." That evening, as predicted, the storm arrived. Not a blizzard this time. Just steady snow that would add another foot to the base. Jack stood with Adelaide on their deck. They'd built a house halfway up the mountain, positioned to see both the resort and the peaks, watching the flakes fall through the porch light. "Nora called," Adelaide said. "She's been accepted to the graduate program in atmospheric sciences. The one in Switzerland? The one in Switzerland." They stood quietly, proud and wistful in equal measure. Their daughter, for she was theirs in every way that mattered, carrying forward the tradition of observation and truth, but making it her own. "She wants to study how climate change is affecting avalanche patterns," Adelaide continued. "She says the historical data isn't matching current conditions, and someone needs to document the differences." "She's right," Jack said. "The snow's been telling us things are changing. 20 years ago, this storm would have been colder, drier. The avalanche dynamics are shifting. Will you miss her?" "Every day. But she's got her notebook. She knows how to see. She'll be fine." Adelaide leaned into him. "You know what I love about you? You taught her to leave, but also showed her how to stay grounded." "You taught her to lead," Jack countered. "To make sure observations turn into action." "We make a good team," Adelaide said, and Jack could hear the smile in her voice. "The best," he agreed. Inside, their life together spread warm and comfortable. Adelaide's office, with its CFO awards and foundation certificates. Jack's study with its shelves of filled notebooks and weather instruments. Nora's room kept ready for her visits, the kitchen where they'd shared 1,000 meals and conversations about snow and souls, and the importance of speaking truth. It wasn't the life either of them had planned. Jack had expected to stay in the Forest Service, fighting fires and controlling avalanches until retirement. Adelaide had expected to marry someone from her world, someone who understood portfolios better than powder days. Instead, they'd found each other in a crisis and discovered that their different languages, his of snow and weather, hers of systems and leadership, translated into something universal: the courage to see clearly and act accordingly. The resort had become a model for the industry. The foundation had grown into a major force for safety, education, and ethical leadership. The notebook, that simple, duct-taped collection of observations, had inspired a movement of professional witnesses who understood that documentation wasn't bureaucracy but responsibility. And through it all, the mountain continued its ancient teachings. Snow fell and melted, accumulated and slid, whispered its warnings to those who knew how to listen. Jack listened. Adelaide ensured others heard. Nora would carry the practice forward into a warming world where the old patterns were breaking down and new ones needed to be learned. "Remember the night we met?" Adelaide asked suddenly. "You standing there with your notebook, challenging everything? I remember you in that red dress, looking like you belonged in a New York boardroom, not a mountain crisis center. I remember thinking you were either crazy or the only sane person in the room. What decided you? When you knelt down to explain the map to Nora, the patience in your voice, the way you made complex things simple without making them simplistic. I knew then that you were someone who understood that truth isn't just about being right. It's about making sure others can see what you see." Jack turned to face her, snow catching in her hair, her face illuminated by the warm light from inside. Even now, years later, she could still take his breath away, not just her beauty but her fierce integrity, her willingness to stand for truth even when it cost her. "I love you," he said simply. "I love you too," she replied. Notebook and all, they went inside as the snow continued to fall, adding another layer to the mountain's endless story. In the morning, Jack would be out early, checking conditions, making observations, filling another page in his current notebook. Adelaide would be in the office, fighting for budgets and standards, and the principle that safety was an investment, not a cost. But for now, they sat together by the fire, comfortable in their shared silence, while outside the mountain settled under its new blanket of snow. Safe, watched, protected by people who'd learned that the greatest danger isn't avalanches or storms, but the silence of those who see danger and say nothing. The notebook sat on the table beside them, closed for the night but never finished. Tomorrow would bring new observations, new patterns to document, new truths to speak. The work never ended. But neither did the satisfaction of doing it well. Doing it honestly. Doing it together. And if someone had asked them whether it was worth it, the fight, the friction, the constant vigilance, they would have answered with a story. The story of a night when beacons lied and a notebook told the truth. When a janitor's observations mattered more than a contractor's certificates. When a CEO chose transparency over narrative and found something more valuable than good PR. They would tell about the children's choir that sang safely in a smaller venue, while avalanches rumbled down the paths they would have traveled. About donors who gave more generously to an organization that admitted problems than they ever would have to one that promised perfection. About a community that learned to value the voices of those who watched and documented and spoke up, regardless of their title or position. Most of all, they would tell about how truth compounds like interest. How one person's courage to speak becomes another's permission to observe. How a culture of honest assessment creates safety more surely than any technology or protocol. The fire crackled, the snow fell, and somewhere in the darkness, the mountain continued its patient teachings for those who knew how to listen. Jack and Adelaide listened, as they always had, as they always would, and in that listening, In that willingness to hear uncomfortable truths and act on them, they'd found not just safety but meaning, not just success but significance. "Read the snow, read the soul," Jack murmured, the old maxim that had guided him through everything. "Both are always speaking," Adelaide completed. "We just have to remember to listen." And listen they did, through all the seasons that followed, teaching others to do the same. The notebook filled, page by page, with observations that mattered because someone was paying attention, someone was documenting truth, someone was willing to speak up when silence would be safer, but lives hung in the balance. That's the real story of the mountain and the storm, the notebook and the truth. Not that heroes emerge in crisis, though they do, but that heroism lives in daily observation, in consistent documentation, in the courage to say what needs saying even when power prefers silence. The mountain knew this. It had always known. And now, thanks to a duct-taped notebook and the people who believed in its worth, others knew it too. Listen to the snow. Read the patterns. Document what you see. Speak truth to power. Value expertise over authority. Choose lives over liability. These weren't just rules for avalanche safety. They were rules for life, written in pencil on pages that would yellow and fade, but whose message would endure as long as there were mountains and snow, and people brave enough to say, "Something's wrong here, and I can show you why." That's what Jack's notebook taught. That's what Adelaide's leadership proved. That's what their story, spreading outward like ripples from a stone dropped in still water, continued to teach everyone it touched. When has unseen expertise in your life kept you safe? When have you witnessed someone speaking up for safety, despite pressure to stay quiet? Share your own stories about valuing the wisdom of those who observe, document, and have the courage to voice uncomfortable truths, because every mountain, whether made of snow or systems, needs its watchers, and every watcher needs to know their voice matters.